And welcome in. It's Sports by Brooks on Fancred on a Wednesday. Great to have you. We do this every weekday at noon Eastern time. I'm Brooks Melchior in Los Angeles. Our producer is Cam Smith, and LeBron is at it again. About LeBron James throughout the show. We'll also be joined by Greg Bedard of Boston Sports Journal, Las Vegas Review Journal, and we'll go around the NFL. We'll talk about the Patriots. We'll talk about the Lions, Matt Patricia. We'll talk about the Jalen Ramsey, a lot of stuff there. And we'll also talk NFL and some LeBron James with Andrew Brandt, former Packers executive, player agent. He has the Business of Sports podcast, which is arguably the number one sports business podcast in existence today. Executive director of the Morad Sports Law Center at Villanova University. Andrew Brandt is an ace to have on this show to talk about some of the issues involving the NFL. Talk maybe Chargers to St. Louis, Chargers to London. And we'll also have the Oracle out here on the West Coast. And I do mean the Oracle of the Pac-12, John Wilner of the San Jose Mercury News. No one covers the Pac-12 on a day-to-day basis like John Wilner. Lucky to have him. First time that we're going to have him on the show. Really, really look forward to having him and talking about what's going on right now inside the lines in terms of football in the Pac-12, and then outside the lines, some weird, bizarre things are always happening with the Pac-12, and we're going to get filled in by John Wilner. But first, of course, if you're on my timeline on Twitter, you know that we've got the best coverage of the LeBron James disaster involving his comments in China and Daryl Morey, right? And so we're going to run through some of the amazing video that we have been posting, in addition to just some of the things that LeBron has been saying. And right off the top of the show, Cam Smith, our producer in Boston. Cam, go ahead and put or get ready to put up. There is a clip that I put up early this morning that I thought captures LeBron James in the last 2 days better than anything I have seen. It's extremely short. It's from one of Dave Chappelle's Netflix specials. It's the first of the two shows, the one where he was vaping. So go ahead, and I think this captures LeBron James' last 2 days in less than a minute. This is Dave Chappelle. You can go ahead and put that up, Cam, at his Netflix special.
If Martin Luther King had a sneaker deal, we'd still be on the back of the bus. They always true. The Nike exec come up, "Hi, Martin. We need you to tone down the talk of civil rights and blacks being humans. It's upsetting our southern distributors. But I don't understand. I thought that's why I had a sneaker deal in the first place." Not quite. Really, it's a walking shoe, and we like the marching, but try to understand.
That's amazing. That's amazing. It's a walking shoe, and we like the marching. A snicker deal. That's LeBron James' situation the last 2 days, right? We have another clip that I want to play, and let's just go ahead and get this out of the way. It's an unbelievable clip. And so there's a video game called NBA 2K, and it's NBA 2K20. It's the current version of the game. And in this NBA-based video game, there is something called My Career Mode. And as part of the My Career Mode, there is a LeBron James character, and LeBron James is shown in this video game giving advice to players. Now, this is produced by LeBron's production company, Spring Hill Entertainment. So go ahead and put the clip of the LeBron character giving advice to young players.
Those people like I did, poor, without hope. Those people, those kids, They exist on every corner of the globe, and they're all deserving of a chance. I believe no one person is capable of turning the tide, but we all have an obligation. Because somewhere along the way, somebody picked us up, and that's why we pay it forward.
So run that one more time. I want to catch the beginning of it because that's key.
Up like I did. Poor. I speak for those without a voice. People who grew up like I did. Poor, without hope. Those people, those kids, they exist on every corner of the globe, and they're all deserving of a chance. I believe no one person is capable of turning the tide, but we all have an obligation. Because somewhere along the way, somebody picked us up, and that's why we pay it forward.
Holy Christ. Unbelievable. It's real, and it's spectacular. That's from NBA 2K, LeBron James, bringing a voice to the kids, the people, poor people, people who are in distress around the globe, according to LeBron, of course, and the NBA 2K video game. Amazing. If only art imitated life. It hasn't worked out that way in this case. So I wanted to also kind of clue you in because it's been a little weird in the last 48 hours that LeBron would continue to keep going. And later in the show, we're going to show you what he did yesterday at Lakers practice, where he just couldn't stop himself. He had to keep addressing the Morey situation. But in this particular case, yesterday, as opposed to the first day, it wasn't, and it makes it worse in a sense, it wasn't necessarily framed as involving Daryl Morey, the comments that he made yesterday. Oh, but they were definitely directed at him. A little more subtle from LeBron. We'll share some of those with you from yesterday. And of course, we're the only people out there in the media that is in the process of taking these clips, right, editing them, LeBron's comments, and showing you, hey, what's actually going on? So now you know. Amazing. So, but the first thing I wanted to drill down on is why would LeBron be so upset that he would go 2 straight days and nonstop attack Daryl Morey, the GM of the Rockets, for putting out what, at least inside the borders of the United States, is about as innocuous a tweet as you can imagine. It's fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong. Now, we recognize we have a tyrannical dictator in China, which we do, and Daryl Morey at least should have had a clue as to what might happen, seeing as the Rockets are China's team, and this is $1 billion situation for the NBA. Mark Stein, by the way, in the New York Times reported today that the Rockets have already lost up to $25 million so far in a loss of sponsorships that emanate out of China. And of course, that number's only going to go up. Stein, by the way, also addressed the job status of Morey going forward, because when you think about it, and I mentioned this yesterday, when Tillman Fertitta bought the team recently, he paid $2.2 billion, and the 0.2, the 200 million as part of that valuation is directly connected to the Rockets' presence and ability to generate revenue in China. So I don't care how good a general manager Daryl Morey is, if the Rockets don't have their sponsorships reinstated, right, in China, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen until there's an apology from Morey or he departs the team, they're just going to be out of luck, and they're going to be out what could amount to, in the end, 9 figures. All right. But Mark Stein mentioned in the New York Times that he didn't see Morey being fired, by Fertitta, and it would be a PR disaster, of course, the United States, to say the least. And Ted Cruz, senator in Texas, has already been criticizing Fertitta for throwing Morey under the bus on Twitter, which the Rockets owner did, fueling the fire at the very beginning of this controversy, right? So we're going to continue to talk about that issue between Fertitta, Morey, and China as it pertains to that amount of money that's involved, because as we understand it, all of the NBA deals, right, they're going to be reinstated except the Rockets deal. And that deal is contingent on an apology from Daryl Morey, or perhaps Morey's departure from the team. We've documented that for you the last couple of days. And Mark Stein all but confirmed that today in the New York Times. So as we continue to talk about that subject, now let's jump into football. Let's jump into the NFL. One of the best in the business up in New England, Greg Bedard, joins us from the Boston Sports Journal and the Las Vegas Review Journal. And we're going to go around the NFL and talk about some of the big issues right now that are happening in the NFL with Greg Bedard of the Boston Sports Journal and the Las Vegas Review Journal. And on Twitter, let me check him out up here. Make sure I have his Twitter handle right. It's Greg A. Bedard. It's all one word, Greg A. Bedard. And you can bring Greg up, Cam, whenever you get the opportunity. Greg A. Bedard, B-E-D-A-R-D, on Twitter. And he has been covering the NFL for quite a long time. I know him, and a great guy. And so we had to get him on because he gives us both the perspective in New England, but also a national perspective. Greg, I really appreciate the time. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, anytime, Brooks. Finally good to hook up with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I wanted to get your first blush reaction to the Jalen Ramsey trade. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, look, it's a bundle to give up. I mean, 2 first-round picks for a cornerback. There are places like New England, which they would tell you that they could find guys that can do sort of similar to what Jalen Ramsey does at a fraction of the price. I mean, they did sign Stephon Gilmore. Now that deal looks like a bargain compared to what the Rams, not only are they giving up 2 first-round picks, but they're going to have to sign them to an extension. And hopefully they have something verbally, some sort of verbal agreement, because if they don't, then Jalen Ramsey has them sort of over a barrel in terms of what he can demand, when he's a free agent. But in terms of what he gives the Rams have been scuffling. This is not unusual with a Wade Phillips defense. He often, you look back through his track record, as soon as his first and the second year, he does really well in a place, then suddenly they start to fall off. There are a bunch of different reasons for that, but they definitely needed something different. Aqib Talib just went on IR. Marcus Peters is very undisciplined. I could see why he was probably driving them crazy, and they decided to cut bait. Jalen Ramsey, look, I'm really interested to see what happens, because now he gets to put up or shut up, because he's been talking about being the best cornerback in the league for so long, but he's been in a cover 3 where really he's playing more zone than anything else. Now he's going to get a chance to play man-to-man. So now he's going to get to show whether he can do it or not. We know Stephon Gilmore can do it in New England. He's been doing it since he got here. Now Jalen Ramsey is going to get the opportunity to go mano-a-mano against the best receiver on the other team, and now we'll see whether he's really the best or it's just all talk.
What about the Rams? Do you think this team is a playoff team at this point?
At this point, no, they're not. And,
wow.
Look, Belichick sort of exposed some things with the Rams last year in the Super Bowl, especially with Goff. You sort of take away his first read, or I'll give McVay a lot of credit. He's one of these designers that really schemes up the offense for the quarterback and makes it as simple as possible, which Goff needs. And some of the more complicated defenses are taking that away from him. But the big issue there is the offensive line. I mean, in terms of, it's really a run-first offense. They can't run block very well. They can't pass block very well right now. And I just don't see, a way out of that for them. And I think that ultimately is going to be the Achilles heel for this team, that they're not going to be able to score enough points. I think they'll get the defense, decent enough, because they do have a bunch of really good players on that defense. But, at the end of the day, are they going to be able to outscore some of these teams, including, even a team like the Seahawks? And I don't think they're going to be able to do it.
Visiting with Greg Bedard of the Boston Sports Journal, talking NFL, and you talked about offensive line and New England Patriots, obviously at the top of the NFL right now, but it's a patchwork situation with the offensive line. How important is that going to be down the stretch? Are they going to be able to patch that up to the extent that they can make a Super Bowl run with that offensive line as it stands right now?
I think they can. I mean, even if they don't have a whole lot of improvement, and they are banking on Isaiah Wynn coming back at left tackle off of IR here in a few weeks and sort of, resuming what he had shown early on in the season, which was, he was playing really well. But the problem is, he keeps getting hurt and he hasn't been able to stay on the field, which is a problem. But they're banking on that. I mean, the cavalry's not coming in at left tackle. It's Isaiah Wynn or bust. If it's not him, then they're going to have to get by with Marshall Newhouse, which you worry a bit with. But, with Josh McDaniels and Dante Scarnecchia and Tom Brady, they can figure that out. I do think at the end of the day, I think they have enough, as long as, if Shaq Mason, who a year ago at this time, he was an all-pro level right guard. Right now, he's about average. I think he hasn't been listed on the injury report, but he looks like he's hurt to me. That's really hindered what they've been able to do on the offensive line, because we already know they lost David Andrews, their center. It was one thing to lose him, but to lose him and then also have Shaq Mason take a couple steps back, that's been really tough for them inside. But I think if Shaq can get better, a little healthier, they had 11 days off this week. They still have their bye week coming up. If they can get him some rest, get him a little healthier, then I think they can be okay enough on the offensive line. And in general on offense, I mean, sort of the blueprint for this team is going to be what we saw in the Super Bowl last year. If the Patriots really just need to get to 24 points pretty much against anybody, and, maybe the Chiefs, I don't know if that'll be enough. We'll have to see at the time when they play them. But if the offense can get to 24 points, they feel good about winning just about every game, and I think they should, because that's how – it's a defense-first team now. It just is, and people just have to get used to that.
You don't think the running game's a concern with the Pats?
A little bit, but I think, given their history, that's something that they'll figure out. They're a big problem, which not a lot of people have been talking about, is, yes, we all know they lost Rob Gronkowski, who's a great all-around tight end. And we knew that was going to be an issue, but the problem has been that Matt Lacoste, who was supposed to be Gronk's replacement, hasn't been able to stay on the field. He just got dinged up. He's probably out 2 to 4 weeks. That left one tight end, Ryan Izzo, who's an undersized guy, and his inability to block on the edge has really taken away their outside running. So it's really made them one-dimensional. They just brought back Ben Watson. They just brought back a guy by the name of Chamberlain, who's a big kid, good blocker, played with the Jets and the Giants. If they can get Watson and Chamberlain going in the running game, run blocking, I think that opens up a few more things, and I do think that they can get it straightened out.
Visiting with Greg Bedard at Boston Sports Journal, Las Vegas Review Journal. Let's talk about what everybody's screaming about right now, and that's the officiating. And I wanted to get your perspective, and I wanted to ask you specifically, because I know you're versed on this, what role do you think the collective bargaining agreement is playing in this, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's huge, and I think I remember writing it at the time when I was at the Boston Globe or at SI that, the last, and I think they just came to a new agreement on the CBA, but the last CBA that the refs in the league agreed to, there were a lot of things in there that sort of, rubbed the rank and file the wrong way. It actually sent a lot of them into early retirement. Because they didn't like what was coming down the road, and they wanted to sort of make sure they got their, retirement payments and things like that before things got kind of screwed up. And so I think that was a factor. I think it's also been a factor that, the NFL has added more full-time officials, which the best NFL officials, the most veteran guys, these are guys who already have side businesses. I mean, most of them run their own business, and this is a part-time job for them. And, you couple that with the TV money that's come available, where every network wants one or two officials on their broadcasts. I mean, it's better money. It's easy money. They don't have to work as
Wow.
hard.
So you're saying that the guys that we're watching on television, the former officials, they're getting more money from the networks, and that's why they're leaving. And those are the best officials?
Yeah. I mean,
them?
and what you've seen is a trickle-down effect. So, like John Perry, he was on the Monday night broadcast, and this is a guy who I think was the official in the last Super Bowl. And he left to go take the TV money, which is bigger, and you don't have to work as hard. And, now that he's gone and you have Gene Steratore gone, I mean, there's a whole list of them that have left in the last couple of years. Those guys leave, and all of a sudden other guys get bumped up, and there's a trickle-down effect in terms of, the depth and the veteran experience on these officiating crews. And I think it's really thin the ranks. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. And, there's no easy way out of it for the NFL.
As I was watching, I know obviously you're well versed on the Packers and the Lions game. And obviously there were some problems in that situation with the officiating. But it struck me that the Lions had so many opportunities to close that game, and they weren't able to do it. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think about Matt Patricia? Do you think that he is the guy in Detroit? What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's doing a good job sort of instituting his program. I mean, I did have, a worry with, Matt, that he was going to try to be too much of a little Bill, and that's never really worked for anybody. I mean, really the guys who have been the most successful, who have left this program, like the Bill O'Briens of the world, these are guys who, had experience, coached for other people's before they got to New England. I mean, Matt Patricia is a guy who basically came in, and this is the way Belichick likes it. He brings guys in who don't have a lot of experience, that he teaches exactly what he wants, and they sort of grow up in that program, and they don't know a whole lot of other things in terms of coaching techniques and how to deal with teams, just what Bill does. And, it's the same thing that Josh McDaniels ran into when he went to Denver. But I do think I've been impressed with the job that Matt's done this year. I do think, look, between the Chiefs game and this game, you're looking at a Lions team that could conceivably be 4-0-1 at this point. And I do think that they're going to be in the thick of the playoff mix. I do think he's done a good job. And I think they're going to be really competitive. I know they have a tough game this week, but I think if he can keep the team up and confident, I think this team's going to be right there till the end, if not in the playoffs.
Tell us about the Boston Sports Journal.
Yeah, this is really something that I sort of came up with. I got laid off from Sports Illustrated, and I looked around, and I didn't think there was going to be a chair for me at the end of the day. And 20 years in the league, covering the league from the Palm Beach Post to the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel to the Globe to SI. I wasn't ready to give that up yet. And, there weren't any jobs out there at the time, but, DK in Pittsburgh was doing some things with his own site. And I figured, there were some other out of work writers in the Boston area that people knew. And I figured, hey, let's give it a chance. And, we're in our third year. We're surviving. It's certainly not easy. And, we're going to go through a little bit of a transition period here with, me doing more league stuff with the Las Vegas Review-Journal, which I'm excited about, being a sort of being a national NFL guy. But, we have some really good plans for BSJ to continue and, take another step with me sort of taking more of a backseat. But, I want to be involved as long as possible. I mean, this is my baby. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the content that we put out. I think there's a place for it in this saturated Boston market. And, I think we've done a good job. And like I said, I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the people that, work for me. And I think we're covering Boston sports the right way.
That's awesome, man. As an independent voice, it's critical, I think, when you look at the corporate media, everything overlaps.
Yep.
And there are undoubtedly agendas, and there are agendas with independent things as well. But man, what you guys are doing, I think, is really the lifeblood of journalism in keeping that independent voice out there that is commercially viable. And I congratulate you on that, man. And congratulations on the Las Vegas gig too.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, you even look at this market. I mean, all the radio stations have affiliations with the teams, and a lot of the, the TV outlets, and so it's dwindling the amount of independent voices. And I think, Boston has a storied sports journalism, history, and I think we've kept that up, and I look forward to the future. I think it's bright for BSJ.
I can't thank you enough for your insight, your expertise. I really appreciate it, Greg. Thanks.
Anytime, Brooks.
That's Greg Bedard of Boston Sports Journal and the Las Vegas Review-Journal, and giving us some insight around the league. We're going to talk NFL with Andrew Brandt, who's another guy who's been around, well-versed. He's been with teams. He's been an executive. He's been an agent. He's a professor now of sports law, podcaster, ESP. Jesus, he's everywhere, right? So we're going to have him later on to speak to some of the hot button topics like LeBron. He's been opining on television about it. But also I want to talk to him about the Chargers and their status, and Jalen Ramsey. And Ramsey with kind of a NBA type free agent move, if you will. It struck me when I was looking at news reports of the Ramsey trade yesterday, of course, to the Rams, and the Rams give up a couple of first-round picks for Jalen Ramsey. And in the story, you get that description, haul of picks, right? That description that we've all heard before. They got a haul of picks. Well, when you get a haul of picks, what is that? That's invoking the NBA. That's associated with the NBA. That's what I thought when I saw haul of picks. No, it was the NFL. How many times in my lifetime, how many times has this happened? I can't remember a time where a player was able to, maybe there is something, maybe there's something recent I'm missing, but where a player was able to force a trade as he was sitting out, not playing, and clearly was faking an injury in the process. Clearly says he's got a back injury. And then we end up seeing Jalen Ramsey that week doesn't play for Jacksonville, and he's posing in an Instagram photo in Houston after the Texans game with Texans quarterback Deshaun Watson. Clearly his back had cleared up, or was he getting treatment in Houston? Somehow I doubt it. But those were the circumstances. Upon which that deal was struck. And it's remarkable that the Rams would give up 2 first-round picks, in this situation. Now, if you look at the people on this trade, and we heard Greg's perspective, and Greg didn't sound that enthusiastic. He was saying, look, there's a lot of teams that feel like they can manufacture something out there that can replicate what Jalen Ramsey can do. But if you listen to guys from places like Pro Football Focus, organizations, companies that works with the NFL, those guys like Sam Monson, who we had on this show a couple of weeks ago, they're raving about Ramsey, and they're raving about this trade to the Rams because Ramsey is such a transcendent player. But on the other side, you have people who think, well, maybe it's not that big of a deal, and the Rams have made a big mistake. So it's a huge gulf there, and I'm fascinated to see what happens. But the bottom line with the Rams is it hasn't so much been the defense. It was against the Bucs, but it's been the offense and the offensive line and Todd Gurley. And I don't think it's going to get much better with Jalen Ramsey. And now you got the Niners and you got the Seahawks. And we on this show called it like 3 weeks ago. So we'll get back to the NFL here shortly. But we're going to be visiting coming up with John Wilner in San Jose at the Mercury News about college football. But I want to go to the LeBron James situation and revisit it, as we've talked so far about what might have pissed off LeBron to the extent that he would go basically crazy the last 2 days. And the second day particularly was weird because it really gives you an indication of just how insulated he is, right? When you talk about a lack of self-awareness, I don't necessarily think that's the case, because when you say that, you're placing that in the context of you and I or the public. Well, clearly, LeBron doesn't care about the public. He doesn't consume media in the way most people do. And he has an entourage that he surrounds himself with, friends, family, whatever it is. And they all agree with him. And they all tell him everything's fine, including his management team, his agents, his companies. Clearly, no one, and I mean no one, is floating anything negative, which is why LeBron would come back and do what he did yesterday. Bizarre. Absolutely. But it is bizarre. Now, in a way, it isn't, in that if you only care about money, you only care about your situation in China and the financial part of it, then maybe it's not so bizarre. And that's what we're going to give you an indication of right now, because this really is personal for LeBron James and him lashing out at Daryl Morey. And I'm going to tell you why right now. There was an article that came out on ESPN.com from Dave McManaman, who is based here in LA and covers the Lakers for ESPN. And so when you're trying to figure out why LeBron's so pissed at Daryl Morey, part of that article, I think, explains it. And I'll read you a paragraph from there. I also want to play some clips here, Cam, in a second. Our producer, Cam Smith in Boston. I want to play some clips which I think indicate that yesterday LeBron was taking continuing subtle jabs at Morey that, of course, the media wasn't reporting in that context. But I first want to read you this paragraph from the story. So this is from ESPN.com yesterday. LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Kyle Kuzma, and Rajon Rondo, to name a few, had appearances canceled in China. One Lakers player, sources told ESPN, had agreed to a $1 million endorsement deal with the Chinese company prior to the trip. When he arrived, poof, it was gone. A 7-figure payday went out the window. James, after taking 15 consecutive summer trips to China, skipped it this year to complete the filming of Space Jam 2, anticipating that the China Games would serve as a substitute. Some of his most important appearances of the year, including 2 with Nike and 1 with Beats by Dre, were canceled during the trip. Let me repeat that. Some of LeBron James's most important appearances of the year in China, including 2 with Nike and 1 with Beats by Dre, were canceled during this trip. Why were they canceled? They were canceled not so much because of the Morey tweet, but because of the way the Chinese government portrayed that tweet to the public in China, and more specifically, just the actions of the Chinese government in response. When I say the people of China, in reference to a response to the Morey tweet, well, the people of China don't have Twitter. It's banned in the country. So the idea that there was this sort of uprising within the country against LeBron James, the Lakers, and the Nets, that's false. 100% false. All you have to do is look at the attendance of the 2 games. Not only were they sold out, but on the secondary market, online ticket reseller sites in China were selling those tickets to the Lakers Nets games for 7-8 times face value, right? So the Chinese people, they weren't worried about being associated with what was going on. They were showing up. They didn't have masks on. They weren't worried about what the Chinese government was projecting to us and perhaps to them to a certain extent. No, this was the Chinese government. That's what makes it so much worse in the context of LeBron's comments the last 2 days. This is a function of a Chinese dictator, Xi Jinping, who wants everyone to believe that the people of Hong Kong are trying to break away from China with their protest and create a sovereign country. So any sort of rhetoric to that effect, he's going to strike upon and grab and tell everybody on the mainland about it and tell the world what's happening. And he told the world in reports from state-run media about the erroneous, that's what it was called, the erroneous tweet of Daryl Morey, right? But we also saw it projected and displayed in the embargoing of sponsorships and broadcasting of the NBA, including the Rockets, which I expect, again, will not be rolled back until Daryl Morey provides an apology that's not coming and shouldn't come, and or he departs the team. That's why I'm saying there's a pretty good chance it's not going to be around in Houston very long, right? So this is all a function of the Chinese government, everything. And when you think about LeBron James siding with the Chinese government with his comments, because that's what he's doing directly when he condemns, rebukes Daryl Morey, when he says that Morey is misinformed, right? Morey's not misinformed. Morey tweeted that out reportedly because he knows a lot of people in Hong Kong, number one, and he's traveled extensively in Hong Kong and China. And if anybody knows something about that situation, it would be the guy who's the general manager of essentially China's team, right, in country, the Houston Rockets, because of Yao Ming. Now, that said, he didn't know enough about the situation because all hell broke loose. But compared to everybody else, he's pretty damn well informed. So when you think about what I just read to you, the fact that this directly impacted LeBron James, and what I'm about to tell you, which is LeBron James was responsible for shutting the players down with the media in China. That's another part of the story. He also did that, right? And we've got that linked up on my Twitter feed. All this stuff is linked on my Twitter feed at Sports by Brooks, and you already know that, I'm sure. But so now LeBron James, we find out from the Dave McCamican, however you pronounce his name, from his article, now we know, what LeBron James was doing behind the scenes at that situation. So with all that in mind, LeBron James came out in front of the media. McManaman. You think I would get that? McManaman. Yikes. With all that in mind, let's revisit some of the clips that we've been showing you of LeBron James. We showed you yesterday what was going on at Staples Center and some of the embarrassing, borderline tragic remarks of LeBron, essentially siding with a dictatorship over someone advocating freedom, right? But now we've got new clips to show you that give you a little insight into LeBron James now that we've laid the context out for you properly. All right. So we're going to do clips number 2 and 3 here, Cam. And the first clip, number 2, right? Now, understand, this is not anymore in the context of Daryl Morey. That was 2 days ago. But yesterday, he still made some comments on the subject without mentioning Morey's name, right? So you have to listen to what he's saying with that in mind. So go ahead and play that first clip, number 2, Cam.
You don't have a lot of knowledge. If you're not, if you don't have a lot of knowledge about it, or you don't quite understand it, I don't think you should talk about it, because it just puts you in a tough position. So there's.
Let's run that back one more time.
And I think issues all over the world, I think the best thing we can do is, if you feel passionate about it, talk about it. If you're not, if you don't have a lot of knowledge about it, or you don't quite understand it, I don't think you should talk about it, because it just puts you in a tough position. So there's
issues all over the world. You heard that, right? Yeah. If you don't have knowledge about it, don't speak. What did he say the day before? That Daryl Morey didn't have knowledge about it. And that Daryl Morey, in a tweet, he said in a tweet LeBron did, could have waited a week, right? In his tweet. So now, nobody is portraying that as another shot at Daryl Morey except us, because we've done all the research, investigation, examination. We've laid it all out. And I'm not saying other people don't realize that. They do. But we're placing it in the proper context of how LeBron's on fire. You know how angry he is right now? Probably still. To keep doing this, because remember, this is putting his teammates and the coaching staff and all NBA players, everybody in the league, in an awful situation, beyond a tough situation, because this is the kind of thing, because of the tyrannical nature of the dictatorship in China, that government can be set off by anything, right? Anything. Because with an authoritarian regime, think back to World War II, Stalin, Hitler, you name it. We're talking about 1 million people right now in China in detention camps, concentration camps, ethnic cleansing. That's what's happening in China right now. And every government in the world knows about it, of course, including our government. And it's hard to imagine LeBron James hasn't gotten wind of it in some way. Now, looking at how seemingly tone deaf he is the last couple of days, perhaps not, right? But that's willful ignorance, all right? So now you just saw that initial comment, which was, in my opinion, a veiled shot right back at Morey for the second straight day. And this is after all the backlash of yesterday. The first response, that wasn't enough. Now we've got to double down. Okay. So now let's go to clip 3, Cam. And this is another oblique veiled criticism.
If you're passionate about it, or you feel like it's something you want to talk about, then so be it. I also don't think that every issue should be everybody's problem.
Let's run that back one more time.
Or you feel like it's something, when an issue comes up, if you feel passionate about it, or you feel like it's something you want to talk about, then so be it. I also don't think that every issue should be everybody's problem. When an issue comes up, if you.
So you saw that when an issue comes up, if you're going to talk about it, so be it. So be it. Well, that's what he was calling it yesterday. He tweeted, so be it, right? You want to advocate, so be it. Okay. Coming from a guy who has defined much of his career with his own advocacy, and I could go down the list. But then he goes on to say, if you're going to do that, it shouldn't be everybody's problem. You have got to be kidding me. You talk about a selfish person, a person who only cares. I mean, that's just, there's no other conclusion to say something like that, to project upon Morey's tweet. It shouldn't be everybody's problem. What the hell are you talking about? What does that even mean? I mean, obviously, 80% of what LeBron James has said the last couple of days is incomprehensible. What I'm giving to you is the stuff that is comprehensible. I mean, what's happening right now is, think of a baseball pitcher who normally is asked to be a closer and then having him go try to start a game and throw for 7-8 innings. Well, after the first couple of innings, right, it's a disaster. He can't go more than 2 or 3 innings. That's what's happening to LeBron. He gets his normal 45 seconds in, his normal 90 seconds in, whatever it is. And in fairness, usually it's about basketball, right? Most of the time. But in this particular case, he's asked one question and then another about China and then a third. People will just keep going. And the answers just keep getting worse and emptier and more vapid and revealing. So that's what we're bringing to you. We're giving you the whole picture here, the entire context in what we've shown you from LeBron James over the last 48 hours. I also want to touch upon, as it pertains to LeBron James, and coming up later on this hour, we're going to talk football with John Wilner of the San Jose Mercury News, Pac-12 football particularly, deep dive on that. But there's some other things involving LeBron, in addition to the NFL and college football, some other things involving him that I wanted to point out. And this is something that we just did. And this is involving clip number 8, Cam. So LeBron was addressing the broad nature of the situation in China, right? And now I want you, before we play this clip, I want to point out that in his career, right, he has endorsed Hillary Clinton as a candidate for president. He has campaigned with Hillary Clinton. He has appeared on her campaign literature, which is fine, of course. LeBron has made statements on the record, right, in which he's called the president a bum, hateful. He's attacked the president on specific policies, right? And he's criticized and I'm not going to get into the particulars here, and he's criticized on the record the supporters of the current president, right? Those are inanimate, documented facts, and it couldn't be more political, right? And it also affects global politics when you're talking about the president of the United States. That goes without saying. And one of the criticisms that he had made over the past year has involved something that involves Mexico, the border wall. That's something that LeBron is focused on the record in criticism of the president, right? These are all just specific examples of his activities, all right? So with that in mind, and this again was yesterday as well, play clip number 8, Cam.
I think it's a huge political thing. We're not politicians. I think it's a huge political thing. But we are leaders, and we can step up at times. But there's times where, I'm not saying in this particular instance, but if you don't feel like you should speak upon things, you shouldn't have.
Right. We're not politicians. This is a huge political thing, right? But we're leaders, and we're going to step up on a lot of issues. Sometimes we don't step up on all of them. And I'm not saying this is one of those examples, but that's what you're projecting, right? That's what you're projecting. And then he goes on to say, and sometimes people don't choose to speak on those political issues. So that is a dodge, right, for himself. He's trying to justify, in a sense. It's a little confused, right? But that's exactly what he's doing. If you're paying attention, he's trying to justify to a certain extent without justifying why he's not commenting on the specifics about China. Because This is a huge political story, as he has stated in that remark, right? But now, if you think about his past record, I mean, there's no more athlete out there, and it's why a lot of people admire him. He has spoken out on politics continually for upwards of a decade publicly, right? And that's to his credit. But really, the crux of the issue doesn't involve, politics as we understand it right now, today. This situation is such that it involves actual potential personal sacrifice, right? That's why that Chappelle clip that we played earlier is so important. And if you would, could you bring up that Dave Chappelle thing that we put up to open the show with? Cam, our producer in Boston, Cam Smith. We have this clip of Dave Chappelle, if you're just joining us, from one of his Netflix specials. And he made a joke that I thought perfectly intersects with this situation and what LeBron is doing right now. So go ahead and play that clip from Dave Chappelle.
If Martin Luther King had a sneaker deal, we'd still be on the back of the bus. They always true. The Nike executive come up, "Hi, Martin. We need you to tone down the talk of civil rights and blacks being humans. It's upsetting our Southern distributors." But I don't understand. I thought that's why I had a sneaker deal in the first place. Not quite. Really, it's a walking shoe, and we like the marching, but try to understand.
Wow, that's amazing. So you could play that 5,000 times. I'd laugh every single time. But so now think back to what this situation represents. Compare it to Martin Luther King. Obviously, he was risking everything. He was risking his life every day. Ultimately, it cost him his life. The civil rights effort. He placed everything on the line. Now think about what LeBron James has done in the past in his political activities. Not saying that he's not risking something. He is. Popularity and possibly money. But he's done pretty well. I think he's worth, that's not all that important what he's worth. It really isn't. But it's $600-700 million, and it's going to go up from here. Right? And part of that wealth is tied to Space Jam 2. And a huge piece of that puzzle with Space Jam 2 is distribution. Distribution in China, which exploded in opportunity for Hollywood under the Obama administration, thanks to Joe Biden. He opened up the China market for Hollywood. And so it's key for LeBron James to get Space Jam 2 distributed in China. That's a lot of money. 9 figures. That's what we're talking about. That's what's at stake in this situation, potentially, if the movie's any good. But it's China. Now, I don't want to denigrate those people, but so that's number one. Number two, think about the amount of money he makes besides that. Tens of millions of dollars every year. In no way an exaggeration. As I said yesterday, Klay Thompson makes $9 million a year with Anta for his shoe contract. It's a Chinese company, Anta, A-N-T-A. Now think about LeBron James. It's exponential from there. All right. So then we told you earlier, the Daryl Morey tweet and what the Chinese government did subsequent, right? Canceled a lot of sponsorship deals for NBA players. In one such case, cost them $1 million, right? All these losses, personal, financial, tangible losses, right? Including LeBron James, potentially. I'm not aware right now, and it's hard to say, but I think there's a chance he might lose a couple of bucks because of what Daryl Morey did. Right? But he's in those crosshairs at the moment, as we speak, as he's being asked questions the last 48 hours, being pressed. And the one situation that's political where he has to stand up and give an opinion on something, everybody sees it. Everybody recognizes the stage that he's on. What does he do? Not only does he do nothing in the context of politics, he really does nothing, but he condemns a person who tried to do something political and in the context of America was absolutely the right thing, right? It's the ultimate cowardice because he didn't support, right? It's a natural thing if you're going to condemn what Morey did. He didn't go out and support China in doing that. Oh, no. You can't pin him down on that. Like he just said, we're not politicians. But when he's faced with a personal possible financial loss, what does he do? He condemns the guy, right, who's standing up for freedom, standing against China, condemns him, but doesn't support China. It's the worst possible thing you could do. And it's the one time where he's facing tangible financial losses and things are happening. They're playing out right in front of him. And we saw what his conduct was in China. I told you about it earlier in the show. So we'll continue this discussion, but I want to talk some college football now with the Oracle of the Pac-12. Excited to get a chance to visit with him from the San Jose Mercury News and the Wilner Hotline, which is legend in sports media. It is, John. I can't thank you enough. John Wilner, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Brooks.
You are probably the hardest working college football reporter that I can think of, at least for what I see on your Twitter. But tell us, first of all, about the Wilner Hotline and what you do.
Well, the Pac-12 is a very interesting place. It is the dynamic that exists between off the court, on the court issues, the academic schools, the schools that maybe aren't as academically inclined or as prestigious, the Pac-12 networks versus the Pac-12 conference, which are two kind of competing dynamics under the same umbrella. There's just so much going on out here. Football, basketball, media, the work they're doing on concussions. I just think it's a fascinating place, and I try to cover all of it. And there's no way you can do that properly, but it to me is just completely interesting in every respect.
Now, and you're, of course, top 25 voter, and we get a chance to see your top 25. And this is something I talked about yesterday briefly before we get to the Pac-12. I think LSU is number one team in the country. Why wouldn't they be? And for my money, Oklahoma is number 2. But tell us about your thoughts on the very top of that top 25 in your voting.
Well, I have LSU number 1 this week also. I just think that their wins, the combination of wins over Florida and Texas, it's the best combination in the country right now, really. And, it's hard as a voter. The AP gives you a set of guidelines, and they want you to base your ballot on results. But it's difficult because the schedules are so out of whack, right? Some teams open up with very high quality games in the first week or two, and some teams don't play anybody until October. So you're forced to kind of find a middle ground really until the middle of October when everybody has started to play quality opponents. And to me, at this point, LSU's got the best 2 wins.
Visiting with John Wilner of the San Jose Mercury News and the Wilner Hotline. You printed something recently that played out actually and reported it. There was a game involving Arizona State and Utah, 2 ranked teams, and they ended up on the Pac-12 network rather than on, let's say, an ESPN and the Pac-12 network. You might be able to background us on that. Not available to a lot of people, but why would something like that happen now at this point?
So that game is Saturday afternoon, and it's on the
Right.
Pac-12 networks. And it is two ranked teams. The South Division title is on the line. Maybe even a potential playoff berth, especially for Utah if they can win out. This kind of is representative of that dynamic I was talking about with the Pac-12. What makes it different than other conferences? They could have had that game go on ESPN2 with its 85 million subscribers or households, and instead it's on the Pac-12 networks, which has about 17 million households. It was better for the Pac-12 networks to have that game for its own ratings purposes, even if it maybe you could argue it would suit the conference side better and the schools better if that game was on, a major reach network like ESPN2. So you've got these two entities, what's best for the football product and what's best for the Pac-12 networks, almost competing with each other. The conference would tell you that if you drill down deep enough, you'll see it's all serving the same purpose, but you got to drill down pretty deep to get to that point.
That's unbelievable. And what I want to ask you about is the Big Ten network, the SEC network, we've got the ACC network, and we've got the Longhorn network, and they're all products of big time networks like, let's say, Fox and ESPN. But what's the situation with the Pac-12 network, and what impact do you think it has on football and basketball?
Well, the Pac-12 decided to take a different path and to own its own network and not partner with Fox or ESPN. And those partnerships have borne out over time to provide terrific leverage in negotiating carriage deals, right? And the Pac-12 does not have a partner to do that. And it has, as a result, really struggled. That's why it's in, 1/4 of the homes of most of those other networks. It's basically a regional network. And that has impacted, on two fronts. First of all, the money. The Pac-12 schools are getting far less from their network than the other schools are from theirs. And it's also impacted the exposure. And ultimately, football is the chief marketing product for these schools to potential applicants for admissions, to donors. And the football is not really being seen outside of a very regionalized situation. So it has impacted for many years now on those two fronts, and it's going to continue to impact until they can redo their deals in 2024.
Visiting with John Wilner of the San Jose Mercury News, talking Pac-12 football. And so now they're not being distributed. And of course, these schools are consumed with having a national footprint. And the fact that you lose all that revenue, I mean, that's a big deal in the SEC network. That's one of the reasons why A&M went over there. That's one of the reasons why Nebraska goes to the Big Ten, because all of a sudden it's flush with money for recruiting, for facilities. Don't have that in the Pac-12. What is the solution, and how fast, or is there a solution for the Pac-12?
Well, there is a solution, but they have rejected that solution, which is to basically partner with ESPN or Fox, and essentially rip up their business model now and partner the way the Big Ten has partnered or the SEC has partnered, and let the one of the major networks handle their carriage deals, and that would generate an immediate influx of exposure and money. They don't want to do that because they look 4 years out when their tier one contracts are available, and they don't want to be tied up into the 2030s. They want to basically see what the open market is going to say about their product in a few years. So they're kind of, grit and bear it really for the next 4 years in their current situation. They have chosen not to follow the only way out. They have their reasons. You could argue it's smart at this point. You could also argue that they should do whatever they can as quickly as they can to find a solution to their current problems.
Talking to John Wilner of the San Jose Mercury News about the Pac-12. Let's talk quickly about the fair pay to play law in California, SB 206. Has there been any? I mean, it's 2023, so it's really hard for me to get all excited about it. It's a long way off, and I don't think that's a coincidence. We got litigation, all that stuff, but I mean, how is this interfacing with the California schools in the Pac-12?
Well, everybody's just waiting to see what the NCAA does, right? I mean, they're certainly concerned at the schools and the conference about what's going to happen here. But at the same time, since Gavin Newsom signed that law, 13, I think it's either 12 or 13 states have said that there's something in their pipeline in the legislative process that's going to follow or mirror what California's done. Florida's got something coming that would go into effect next summer. So really, the NCAA doesn't have that much time. 2023 is a long way out, but because of what's going on in the other states, because of the potential for litigation, which is almost assured, I think, they've got to move pretty quick. They have a working group on it, and that working group is supposed to present its initial recommendations at the end of October. It's going to be really interesting to see how far it tries to push Mark Emmert, off of his entrenched position.
Yeah, the Pac-12 really is in the crosshairs because you've got the California schools, and that stands to be a recruiting advantage potentially for Cal, Stanford, SC, UCLA, Fresno, and a lot of other schools. The irony, of course, is that the Stanford president, and I'm sure other presidents are going to push back, at least publicly, on this sort of thing. But then you've got schools that are outside of California. So it's going to be fascinating if we get to that point. Who knows? And maybe that Florida situation, as you mentioned, will speed everything up. I wouldn't be surprised. But I wanted to talk about USC because you're someone who covers the entire conference, probably more than anybody in the country. And so talk about the situation at USC right now and how important USC really is to, I think, the television side of it and the national footprint side of it for the Pac-12.
Just think of it like this. What if Ohio State was a dumpster fire? How would that impact how we view the Big Ten, right? That's essentially what we're talking about here. SC has more national championships than every other team in the Pac-12 combined, and should be measuring itself against Ohio State, Alabama, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, right? I mean, that's what the historical standard is. And 5-7 last year, 3-3 right now. Problems off the field, very serious problems institutionally in other departments. They have a new president. They're going to have a new athletic director. I think that a lot of people talk about what's wrong with the Pac-12. To me, it starts with the fact that the brand schools in football and men's basketball are all struggling right now. SC football and UCLA and Arizona basketball, for different reasons, have not been winning at the standard we'd expect, and that impacts everything.
What about the situation specifically at USC? Where is Clay Helton in terms of jobs? We've talked about it a lot on this show, but the job security of Clay Helton and that situation, of course, they don't have an athletic director either. So how do you see that playing out?
Well, they're going to hire an athletic director, I would imagine, by the middle of November, so that athletic director can be in charge with working with President Carol Folt to make a decision on Helton and his successor. I think Helton is going to be dismissed. I don't think there's any doubt about it, unless by some miracle they run the table and end up in the Rose Bowl. I think he's going to be dismissed, and they are going to have they need to have someone in place quickly, right? Because now you have the the December recruiting period. Those couple of weeks in December have sped up the coaching carousel because everybody needs to have someone new in place by the first weekend of December. I think Helton will be out, and the new athletic director will work with the president to find a new coach, whether that's Urban Meyer or not. We'll see. I'm skeptical of that one for a bunch of reasons, but certainly SC is in position to go out and hire, a top-tier coach.
Now, certainly the Pac-12 really not in a position to field a team in the college football playoff as it stands right now. It would take a miracle, essentially, for it to take place. And, of course, Oregon would be the team that might be in that position. and a very, very good team. But what about the Pac-12 and the potential of expanding the playoffs? We've heard a lot of rhetoric from people like Barry Alvarez, but what about the Pac-12? Where are they coming from, Larry Scott, the commissioner, and whatnot, as it pertains to the playoff? Are they trying to make their presence felt and muscle in to get an expansion specifically of the playoff?
You would think the Pac-12 would be at the top of the list of the conferences clamoring for an expansion, right? They have missed it 2 of the last 3 years. They've only sent 2 teams in the 5 years. But the Pac-12 is not doing that, actually. Larry Scott, the commissioner, said he is fine with, he's open to talking about 8, but he is fine with 4. He is not pushing the narrative at all. He thinks 4 has worked well, and doesn't see, I think, a pressing need to change before the current contract cycle's up. That kind of sits in conflict with what you would think the conference should be doing, just from a competitive standpoint. You know, the conferences that play nine conference games only have received 9 of the 20 bids, right? And the ACC and the SEC have 11 of the 20, and that would tell you that there's something a little bit out of whack in the selection process compared to what it was supposed to be 5 years ago. I think that all 3 conferences that play 9 should be really pushing for a change.
Right. So there's a guy right now who is a name that a lot of people recognize, and I would imagine most of them, if you're watching this show, know about Herm Edwards at Arizona State. I think if you look at the last couple of years, I was very, very skeptical of Herm Edwards, of course, NFL coach, NFL player. We saw him on ESPN for years, all of a sudden showing up at Arizona State. But holy mackerel, this guy's had an unbelievable run so far. And I guess, is he your coach of the year thus far in the Pac-12?
Thus far, he is. Yeah, he's done a very good job for his season and a half. Absolutely. You know, I was skeptical as well, and he's proven everyone wrong so far. I put him at the top of the list. It's hard to make the case for anybody else at this point, because the teams that are doing well, you kind of expected to do well. Utah and Oregon, and then at the other end, there's some of the teams that maybe had a lot of upside potential but haven't quite gotten there. So Herm would be my midseason coach of the year. Absolutely. I don't really think there's much question about it.
One last thing I want to ask you about, and we talked about SC as a flagship program. It absolutely is for the Pac-12. But I think, and I'm old enough to remember, one of the past quasi-flagship programs of the Pac-12, and to me, kind of a mystery team, is Washington.
Yeah.
And Chris Peterson, it seemed like that was a grand slam hire, but they've been kind of treading water. What's going on with that program? Well,
so they made the playoff in 2016, and last year they were in the Rose Bowl. They've won the Pac-12 2 of the last 3 years, but they haven't been back up to that playoff level since 2016. And the perception issue they have is the way they're losing, who they're losing to. They've lost as a double-digit favorite, several times in the last 2 years. So it's not like they are competing at the highest level all the time. They're struggling to beat some middle tier teams, and I think that's what has really kind of put a little bit of a blemish on their momentum and stalled their trajectory. At this point, they've already got 2 losses. They're not in the playoff hunt at all. They could still win the conference. They need to beat Oregon this weekend, and they're going to need some help. But they certainly have not gotten back to that level we saw in 2016.
I mean, is Peterson the guy there? Is he the guy going? I mean, you would think he is, but with recruiting, I mean, what signs of life are you seeing out of there that gives you an indication that because Washington is one of those programs, reminds me a little bit of the University of Georgia, that really never has actualized over a long period of time being a traditional elite power. But Washington certainly, you would think, has that potential, but can they reach it with Peterson?
I think they can. They've taken on the personality of their coach, right? They're very methodical. He is one of the most even-keeled, process-oriented guys around. And that's kind of what they are right now. Very methodical. They're still winning. just not at the level I think a lot of people expected. The next couple of years are going to be crucial for them because there is a load of talent coming through the Seattle high school pipeline. I mean, the top defensive line prospect in the entire country in the class of 2021 is in Seattle. If they can kind of protect their home turf on the recruiting front, I think that they've got the potential to get back to the playoff. But it's going to be a couple of crucial years for them recruiting wise.
Well, I want to personally thank you, John, for your coverage because it's outstanding. And I can't encourage people enough to check you out on Twitter. And that's Wilner Hotline, right? All one word on Twitter. And thank you so much for taking the time with your expertise on this. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's been great. Thank you for having me, Brooks.
That's John Wilner of the San Jose Mercury News. He's Wilner Hotline on Twitter. And I think you can get his newsletter as well through the San Jose Mercury News. It's like a Mark Stein kind of thing with the New York Times. That's something, if you're a football fan, John Wilner is a guy. If you're on Twitter, Wilner Hotline, you should definitely be following him because he's every single day. And he's one of these guys that just is unbelievable in his productivity, the amount of stuff that he puts out. But it's not just Phil. It's some of the things that we talked about. The Pac-12 is beyond bizarre that you've got, as I mentioned before, Arizona State and Utah, two ranked teams, and you've got them playing for the championship, or at least the divisional title, and it's not going to be on ESPN. It's not going to be on Fox. It's not going to be somewhere probably where you could watch it unless you have the Pac-12. Are you kidding me? A quarter of the country has the opportunity to watch that game on Tier 1 cable. That's unbelievable. But for the Pac-12, it's not unbelievable. It's Larry Scott. And that's something that we didn't talk about. But Larry Scott has been on the outs, and now he's back in. But a longtime commissioner of the Pac-12. That's a whole nother story that at some point we'll revisit with John Gonzano. He's another one of our guys on the Pac-12 here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And we're going to be visiting coming up and talking NFL with Andrew Brandt. But we've been talking about the LeBron James stuff, right? And going over some of the things that he's been doing, some of the things he's been saying in relation to China. And he said yesterday that he's not going to talk about it anymore because he's putting his teammates in a tough situation. You think? An impossible situation. I don't have the clip right. I probably should have sent you the clip, Cam, but Frank Vogel, the coach of the Lakers, was asked about LeBron James yesterday. And of course, LeBron James is essentially his employer, his boss. And, but I mean, you talk about an impossible question to answer if you're Frank Vogel. I'll tell you what he said. He essentially said, LeBron's done a great job off the court in the past. He's got tremendous judgment. And this is what Vogel said. He's got great judgment when it comes to when to say something and when to not say something. And I just stand out of the way and, you know, I don't have anything to do with it. He manages it and I trust him to manage it. That was Vogel's comments yesterday. And that's pretty close to exactly what he said because I did a clip on it on my Twitter timeline if you want to see it. But so, I mean, it was really the perfect answer. And you have to believe if there is such a thing in that situation, hey, you can make a case that LeBron off the court for some people, maybe a lot of people, has done a great job when it comes to how he conducts his affairs in public and what he has to say and how he portrays things politically, whatever it is. You could make that argument, I guess, but you can't make the argument really right now that he's someone you can just go with in terms of his judgment on what to comment on now or how to comment about something. Right? I mean, I'm sure there's some people out there in the Chinese government in Beijing who might disagree, but the things that he's been saying the last couple of days, I can't remember a time being on Twitter, being in the media where there was such a universal disdain for what was coming out of someone's mouth in public in the context of sports and have that person lose nothing. Now, remember what we're seeing from LeBron in his axe to grind and the venom that he continues to direct in the direction of Daryl Morey, right? That's based on a situation where he was in China and he had some of his Nike and his Beats by Dre appearances canceled, right? And of course, and this is an important part of the story. And he's got to get Chinese distribution for Space Jam 2. That's important. That's integral to this story. All right. And the other thing I haven't mentioned is if he wants to buy an NBA franchise, which I'm sure he's going to do, he's going to affect, right? Going to need a lot of money, might need a lot of cash, depending on the situation. We saw what the Rockets went for, $2.2 billion, right? What about all the money that China represents to him personally? A hell of a lot. He was going to do 3 big appearances, 3 of his biggest appearances of the year. China, by the way, makes up 11% of the NBA revenue yearly, just to give you an idea. And it's the biggest market for revenue as far as the NBA is concerned and as far as Nike is concerned. And revenues there are spiking dramatically. And in the case of the NBA, will continue to do so because all of the sponsorships, all of the threats, right, all of the scare tactics are just that, just scare tactics. So I want to go down another road with you as it pertains to LeBron one more time in terms of Daryl Morey's situation personally, because you could make the argument that in extending this discussion as he has done over the last 2 days, and in the way that he has portrayed Daryl Morey as someone who's misinformed, someone who's not educated on the subject, right? And the fact that Morey is facing the possibility of being out of a job in the future, you could make the case that this fits the definition of slander. If Morey ends up losing his job, unable to get a job in the future, and who's to say? Because China is so important to the NBA. Who's to say he'd have an easy landing or an easy transition to another team? I don't think he's going to be fired anytime soon. And if they win a championship, probably never. Well, maybe not. Again, you talk about all that money. But if you have those clips ready, Cam, I want to start off with, I want to run through these briefly. I know we have a guest coming up, and we'll continue it perhaps afterwards. But actually, let's just go to number 6. Let's go to clip number 6. This was the third instance 2 days ago in which LeBron James claimed as fact that Daryl Morey was misinformed and not educated on the situation in Hong Kong. Go ahead and play clip number 6.
We're not really educated on the situation. That's all I can say. I believe he was either misinformed or not really educated on the situation. And if he was, then so be it. But I have no idea, but that's just my belief. That's all.
So you heard what he said. He said that Morey was uneducated on the situation or not educated and misinformed. And then you heard him say, but I have no idea. That was at the end of that interview period with the media 2 days ago. He had already, we don't have time to show you all the clips, but he had already said in 2 separate instances before that Morey was misinformed and not educated on the situation, right? But he didn't end it with that qualifier, only until the very end and the last time it was brought up. And who's to say he would have even said that had he not been asked about it again, because he was asked about it over and over again in different ways, right? So with the prospect of Morey being damaged financially in the future, who's to say that what LeBron James is saying right there wouldn't contribute to that situation, wouldn't exacerbate it? Because what James is doing is he's siding with the Chinese government, and it's the Chinese government that continues to pressure Daryl Morey. And that's essentially what this whole situation is about now. That's what extends this story. The Chinese government still expects right now, people don't realize this, but right now, the Chinese government still expects an apology from Daryl Morey. Nobody else in the NBA. And clearly, LeBron James has thrown in with China. That side, the side that is bearing down on Morey alone, right? Now, if LeBron James doesn't bolster China in its position right now, maybe things get better for Daryl Morey. Maybe China eases off. And we know that to a certain extent, the Beijing Olympic Games in 2022 could play a big role in this. In fact, it's been reported by the New York Times that after the initial blow up and the sponsorship apocalypse that embroiled the NBA teams as they temporarily lost sponsorships and broadcasting and whatnot in China, it was the idea that there might be a potential boycott down the road of the 2022 Beijing Olympic Games, Winter Games, right? With that in the back of the mind of the Chinese, that might be playing a role in them backing off as they did, right, before the Lakers and the Nets left. Remember, they were tearing the banners down. Well, that all stopped, right, before the teams had left. When they went to Shenzhen, the second city, that wasn't going on anymore. It was normal. And it was reported by the New York Times that it was the prospect of a boycott in 2022 at the Beijing Olympics that was fueling that rollback, if you will. So we got a guy that we're going to bring up right now. If we've got him available, we do indeed. Cam Smith, our producer from Boston, will bring him up. Andrew Brandt, who is about as an accomplished a person as we've had on this show, right? He does it all, including the best business of sports podcast out there. It's called The Business of Sports. Andrew Brandt joins us. Andrew, I can't thank you enough for joining us. Thanks for taking the time.
No, happy to do it. I'm at my day job now, which is I run a sports law and sports business program at Villanova University, in addition to all my media and other responsibilities. But it's always nice to be in front of the students. And it's interesting because we're going to be talking today about this whole NBA China thing in class. So it's going to be nice to get the views from the young people about this.
Yeah, you've been talking about this quite a bit. I mean, what are your thoughts on it?
You know, a lot to unpack here. I think that I don't know where to start. You know, I've got a column coming out on Sports Illustrated, MMQB, that really sort of brings it back to the NFL, where the NFL obviously was in unfamiliar ground with the whole Colin Kaepernick thing, and they're a naturally conservative group. And I guess what I'm saying is NFL owners and Commissioner Goodell have to kind of be sitting back smug here, that the NBA has been trading in this progressive, socially conscious, liberal lane, and it's not working now. And the NFL never has professed to be this socially conscious, liberal lane. And I guess my point is, it looks like the NBA is just like the rest of them, just like the NFL, just like the NHL, just like Major League Baseball, who never seem to venture out into these progressive lanes as Adam Silver and the NBA has. when it comes to money and business. So business first and the rest follows. That's my immediate reaction to what has happened with the NBA in China, just like the rest of the sports leagues.
Yeah, you made a great point talking about the future influence of LeBron James going forward. And I pointed out earlier in the show that if you look at all of the so-called political stands, if you will, that he's taken over the years, while it might represent potential financial loss, something of that nature, it hasn't. And I don't think there's a whole lot of reason to believe that it would. But in this particular instance, it does represent personal financial loss for him when it comes to China. So at the very moment he's facing it, he ends up essentially by default siding with the Chinese government against Daryl Morey. And my question to you is, and there's been a lot of talk about this, could this be something that's irreparable in tarnishing his marketability, LeBron James, going forward?
You know, I've thought about that, and I've had some questions on Twitter back to me about that. I guess my initial response is no. He's such a huge brand and name that this will have a little blowback and the way I phrased it this morning was blowback in terms of when the next socially conscious stance that he takes is maybe met with skepticism or met with the reaction of, well, you're good here, but not China. What's up? So that will be some blowback, but I don't think legacy-wise, I really don't. Let's just be clear. This is as powerful a voice as we have in sports by the nature of his magnitude, by what he has done. Michael Jordan never had to deal with this. Muhammad Ali never had to deal with this. Pick Jim Brown, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, never had to deal with this. And by this, I mean LeBron James is the first athlete in history to be scrutinized by social media unequivocally. Like from the moment the decision happened, that was the sort of the birth of this intense scrutiny of athletes, not just from newspapers, but from the world with social media. You know, the Twitter really sort of had its advent about 2009. The decision was 2010, and now we've had a decade of just this scrutiny on LeBron. And here's what I say about LeBron. Oh my God, with all of these millions of people pointed towards him, we don't have one negative story about LeBron James. No womanizing, no drinking, no smoking, no sex, no drugs, no staying out in casinos, nothing. And think about that. So yes, he's got a misstep here in kind of blaming Morey and saying he needed to be educated, and you know, when he didn't really know the whole facts himself. And I get it, but let's be clear, LeBron James has a lot of good going, and this I think is more of a misstep than anything.
Well, you know, what's amazing about it is if we're sitting there looking at Twitter on our iPhone, I mean, we're all participating in what LeBron James is involved with, not to the extent financially necessarily, but we're all part of it. It's an unavoidable situation. It's inescapable if you're living a normal life here in the United States. And so I think a big part of the blowback, and we've seen it from the political people, is that this is just payback that's fueling it. But there's a price to be paid. You mentioned it at the very outset when you're trading on this. That's essentially what they've been doing. They've been trafficking it. They've been trading it. And I don't know if you saw the ESPN article that came out when Adam Silver met with the players in China for the first time. LeBron went to him and said, what repercussions are there going to be for Daryl Morey? And Adam Silver's response was, none. We defended you and other NBA players when you were attacking the president. That was the justification in the Dave McMenamin article in ESPN.com that just came out. Unbelievable to see it all come full circle as a boomerang. So we're visiting with Andrew Brandt, who is as an accomplished an NFL observer as there is, front office executive with the Green Bay Packers, agent, and of course, now he's the executive director of the Morad Center for Sports Law Study at Villanova University. And so I really want to ask you about the Jalen Ramsey trade, because from a front office perspective, I haven't seen a whole lot of people addressing this, but you have the precedent of a player who was not playing, right? And was posing for pick when he was supposed to be hurt. He was in Houston posing for Instagram pictures with Deshaun Watson, able to, in effect, a trade for a haul of picks. And when you hear that haul of picks, it's usually in the NBA context. What do you think the owners are thinking about this possible precedent in the NFL?
Well, that's why you saw Shad Khan, the owner of the Jaguars, talk, I guess, what was it, 5 days ago, maybe less, that I talked to him and we're all good.
Yeah.
Words, he kind of felt like, I'm not going to trade this guy because what about the precedent? But, you know, business is business, back to that phrase we use with the NBA. And I've got to look at Shad Khan and I come out of this saying, good deal. And I say good deal because getting 2 ones is something to begin with. Oh, my God. I mean, you're talking about Khalil Mack and Laramie Tunsil, more impactful positions than even Ramsey plays, and Ramsey got more. But here's the thing. As you mentioned, he wasn't going to play for the Jags. And if he did, it would kind of be half-hearted. So kudos to the Jags for leveraging that. And to get 2 ones and change, they obviously had teams interested. We hear about the Eagles, we hear about the Saints, we hear about the Ravens, and they leverage giving the best deal, the best deal, the best deal. And of course, once the Rams traded Peters, they were a little more desperate, and the desperation led to this deal. But again, if you can remember, and I think people listening can, it was probably 10 years ago where the Oakland Raiders traded, I don't think it was 2 number ones. I think it was like a 1 and a 3 for Carson Palmer, who had basically retired rather than play for the Cincinnati Bengals. And the ridicule of the Oakland Raiders, including me, was just rampant. Like, oh my God, they gave up that for an aging quarterback. And then I praised the Mike Brown and the Cincinnati Bengals because look what they did. They got this haul for a player that was never going to play for them. Now, a little different because Carson Palmer had retired, basically saying, I'll retire rather than play for you guys. And Jalen Ramsey had not, and he's effectively on the roster, but who knows? But again, I think it's a major business of football win for the Jags to get this haul for a player that was maybe not going to play for him, maybe play for him half-heartedly, maybe be upset the whole time. So good on that. As for the Rams, you know, they're in a win now mode. You can see it throughout the roster, paying Gurley, paying Brooke, Cooks, signing Clay Matthews at the late part of his career, signing Eric Weddle late part of his career. You know, they're in a win now mode. The problem with win now is when you don't win now.
Yeah.
You're left with a bloated cap because of these deals I talked about and no picks. So they don't allow themselves much margin for error out in LA.
Visiting with Andrew Brandt, and I want to talk to you, speaking of the business of sports, about the San Diego Chargers. I just called them the San Diego Chargers.
Yes.
And it's astonishing. And you know, people are probably still doing that, I would imagine, but it's almost impossible not to. But the Los Angeles Chargers, their situation, it really, I mean, you've been around a long time, and you've been around owners, you've been in owners meetings and all that stuff. This is really extraordinary what's happening, that the fan base in Los Angeles clearly is this small, that the San Diego Chargers fan base still remains relatively vibrant. If you listen to the talk shows, they're still talking about the Chargers, yet we've got this theater of the absurd happening at this tiny little soccer stadium and the visiting fans. And now the problem, what's going on with the new stadium as it pertains to the Rams, because there's been a lot of news that Stan Kroenke's not happy, the owner of the Rams, with his future co-tenant, the Chargers.
Well, it's not his co-tenant, it's his tenant, and he's the owner, and he's the landlord, and the Chargers are the renters. But there's a PSL arrangement. Again, it's complicated, but there's a complex partnership with the PSLs. the original projection where the Chargers were going to make 400 million or 450 million on the PSLs. Now the projection's down to 150.
Wow.
And they're not getting close to that. Listen, we're the ugly redhead stepsister of the new stadium. And it's Rams. It's Rams first. It's Rams owner. It's Rams this. It's Rams that. And oh, yeah, by the way, the Chargers are playing there too. That's not a good situation. Now, I'm going to give a little bit of a break for the visiting fans because, when I was at the Packers and we played the San Diego Chargers, when we're at Jack Murphy Stadium, we scored a touchdown. I'm looking around like, are we at Lambeau Field?
Right.
It happens. And that's going to happen out there, whether you're in the big stadium or you're in the soccer stadium. Now, the soccer stadium was overtaken by Steelers. And guess what's on their schedule next? Bears, going to be completely Bears. And then my Packers. It's going to be complete.
Oh, my God.
On November 17th, it's going to be a green out in L.A. Or Carson, wherever that is, Irvine. So it's something, they get it for Patriots, they get it for Steelers, Packers, Bears, Jets, Giants. I mean, that's all going to be that way, even in the big stadium. The problem for LA is they don't have a fan base, partly because, as you know, there's so many other cool things to do out there, but also partly because they ignored 25 years of building a fan base. There are a lot of NFL fans out there, but there aren't a lot of LA fans out there.
I've got a specific question because I've heard people touch upon this. And what's happening with the Dolphins and the idea of deliberately losing and tanking, I think that's kind of a misnomer that's been invented to a certain extent. But I've heard some talk in passing about the league should step in. And I was wondering, from a legal perspective, an owner's perspective, a league perspective, is there any scenario where the league could step in because of a situation, a tanking situation, if you will, like what we have with the Dolphins?
Yeah, it's a great question because here I am again in my sports law class. I teach a case back in the 70s where the owner of the Oakland A's, Charles Finley, sold or traded his star players after winning a championship to, of course, the Red Sox and Yankees. Some things never change.
Right.
Vida Blue, Joe Rudy, all those Raleigh fingers. And Commissioner Bowie Kuhn at the time vetoed the trade, said, "You're debilitating the franchise. We won't let you do that." I don't see that happening today. Now, we did have the Chris Paul thing with David Stern, but he said he was acting as an owner because they were in bankruptcy. The NBA was running the Hornets at that time, so give him a break there. But I agree with you on tanking a misnomer. Tanking implies losing on purpose. And there's no players who aren't blocking or tackling. There's no coaches who aren't working hard, putting schemes together to try to win. Now, from a front office point of view, what is tanking? Is going young tanking? Is building up draft picks like?
That's the problem.
Yeah, like the Jaguars, like the Raiders over the past couple of years. Is that tanking? I don't know. I mean, I think about a friendship I had here in Philadelphia with a guy named Sam Hinkie who processed the 76ers. And his words ring true to me, which were, "Hey, Andrew, there's no reward in sports for mediocrity. There's no reward. So what do? You try to get generational players, which the Sixers have too with Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, finally, and you go from there. Now, in football, it's harder to get generational players. Maybe once every 5 years you get an Andrew Luck or you get whoever it is. I don't know if Baker Mayfield's that guy, but these are the questions, so football's a tougher sell with the whole tanking thing.
But in the principle of tanking, we talked about the context of trades, but how would there be something applicable where the league would step in and take over? I just think it's funny that people would even bring it up, because I can imagine there would be a scenario. What, are you going to raid the offices and remove people or something? That's kind of what we're referring to here.
Yeah, and I think there's a deference from all commissioners in all sports to allow teams to build the way they want. Look at baseball teams. You think that Bud Selig was going to step in on the Astros 5 years ago, when they were losing like crazy, and now they're the model franchise in the whole MLB. Listen, the Yankees are barely signing free agents. So, I don't see it. It's not in this day and age.
Well, thanks so much for dropping by and taking the time, Andrew. I really appreciate it. It's awesome visiting with you.
I always enjoy it. I'll be back soon. That's
Andrew Brandt. Business of Sports is the podcast. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Love listening to that guy. It's a great podcast. It's one of my, rotation podcasts, like a starting rotation in baseball. He was with us from Villanova University, where he teaches there. But this is a guy who was involved in the draft of Brett Favre, actually the acquisition of Brett Favre with the Packers, the drafting of Aaron Rodgers. And he was part of the front office team at Green Bay who affected the transition to Aaron Rodgers from Brett Favre. And that's something that is always fascinating. Sometimes he'll go back and talk about that process that he went through. You talk about two personalities, and think about what ended up happening with Brett Favre, right? All the places that he ended up. And now the most complex personality, at least a high profile personality in the NFL, he was in the middle of dealing with those two guys, trying to make that happen. And of course, they succeeded on both fronts beyond all imagination to this day with Aaron Rodgers, who, by the way, was unbelievable against the Lions. It's not just a case of open receivers. It's a case of threading the needle. And I think that Aaron Rodgers has proven off and on this season that he might well be the guy who 5 years ago was statistically transcendent, has not been since. But I think that the ability is still there despite the age. And now we might see a realization of what his potential is and always has been with the Packers, in that they finally got not only a lot of talent, especially on defense, but now they've got a coherent offense, a real offense, if you will, and a real running back in Aaron Jones. So it's been a great show. Want to thank our guest today, Greg Bedard from Boston Sports Journal and the Las Vegas Review Journal, John Wilner of Wilner Hotline on Twitter, and also the San Jose Mercury News. This has been like an all-star lineup of deep dive guys. And then, of course, we just had Andrew Brandt, and his podcast is the Business of Sports podcast, also an MMQB columnist, works with Albert Breer over there at Sports Illustrated. And a great job by my producer, Cam Smith in Boston. And we're here every day, Monday through Friday at noon Eastern time. Now, we had a lot of guests today, but if you're new to the show, I want you to know you can comment throughout the show. You can also join me on screen when we get into that. And I think we're going to start to get into that more and more often as we go forward, because God knows we've got a lot of stuff. And I want to get your opinion, your comments, and get you up on screen. It's one of the unique proprietary features of this Fancred mobile streaming app. So again, we'll be back tomorrow at noon Eastern time. And for Cam Smith, this is Brooks Melchior from Los Angeles saying so long. This has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.